Let's understand a very vital part that DTO, data transfer objects, play with the entity framework and why you definitely need to understand them. So here, when we have a student summary DTO, this is giving us information at summary level from this row SQL method here. So you can see that the SQL is doing a lot of work, including getting the name of the student and doing a count of how many enrollment the student has by looking at the student subjects table. The student subjects table is not a class or a DB set within our C# application. So here you can see that we have a student class here. We have a summary DTO, and a summary DTO2, and there's a staff feature table, but that's pretty much it. We don't have any other DB set. So here's where DTO plays a very important role. So you can see I have two DTOs here, one which has no number at the end and one with a number 2 at the end. So if you look at our query here, our query is actually quite complex. It's using a table that is not a DB set or a class within our application. So this sort of work can only be done with the data transfer object that we created, which is student summary DTO. This is the one without a number at the end. In order for you to do that with the vanilla kind of link way of doing it, that's practically impossible. This is because the student subject isn't a class within our C# application, although it might be a table in the backend. So in this situation, you cannot do this because this object doesn't exist. So you have to create this object if you really wanted to make this work, because otherwise entity framework is unable to determine the relationship between this object and the student object that you have in your code. But with row SQL, you can actually bypass most of that and make all that work happen within this row SQL, but yet still utilize the entity framework context and set function that Microsoft have built. So going back to the point here, which is if you want to use a student summary DTO, you have to register it, because otherwise entity framework won't be able to pick it up. That's why within the on model creating, you have to use the following line of code to make the data transfer object work. So this is important to understand why you cannot bypass this. What we're trying to do here without creating a DB set for student subject, this is an impossible task. You have to create this. So a way around it is you actually use the from SQL method over here as part of entity framework, and then you are able to use that table, and using the data transfer object which you have registered with entity framework, you are able to create summary level information in your application as a class linked with entity framework. The only thing that you cannot do is update the database back, because of course there's summary level data and we do not want to update it back into the database. So I hope this makes sense and it gives you lots of ideas to explore around what is possible. The important concept to understand is whenever you create a DTO, make sure you register it with entity framework just for the purpose of auto mapping of fields. So what I mean by that is in your DTO, you have a name and enrollment field here or property. When we run this row SQL over here, so you can see we've got name and enrollment. By registering with entity framework, you're enabling that activity to happen. So the name and the enrollment data that you get from this SQL will automatically get mapped to the fields within the data transfer object. So this is the reason why you register this, but without a key, because we will not be updating the backend database.